Thank you all for coming up. Just made it in time. It's fine, it's fine. That's okay. Well, first of all, I'm going to start I'm going to stand up because then I feel as if I'm more in authority. I want to explain maybe a background to kind of what I do and what a curator does, or what I think a curator does. I was approached by Goldsmiths for a very different reason. They asked me to come in and talk about something that I may have been interested in doing, and I wasn't. And during that conversation, we talked about contemporary craft, making the fair, silver, and lots of things. And out of that came another call saying, would I come in and talk about curating a show? One of the things I do as a curator is I think I act as an intermediary between the maker and the audience, between the maker and maybe a broader world, and often between the maker and an organization. And I try and figure out what everybody's agendas are and what people are doing and looking for and looking at. And I also try and maybe bring a focus on where I think things maybe need to move in a more general way. And it's the generality I want to start talking about first. One of the things that has always fascinated me is the connection between craft and function and craft and use, and about how with the made object our lives is enriched and kind of made better, and that the kind of daily rituals we do can kind of be focused on. So that's something I'll come back to when I'm looking at the work. In this reference, the show was very much about me thinking, and I keep using the word metal and metalsmiths rather than silversmiths, because I think one of the problems is about preconceptions of what silver is and what silver should be to our lives and where it can be. And I think generationally there are people who always have had silver in their life, but there are a whole newer generation who don't and don't really see it as part of their lives. And I suppose I wanted to bridge that gap through this exhibition. Personally, when I was growing up, we always had silver, but it was always in a cabinet, and its only function was an object to be polished. It never seemed to be used in any other way, or never became engaged with in any other way, except that kind of twice yearly event where my mother would take it all out and spend the day complaining about having to polish it and then put it all back in again. So that was kind of where I had a starting point with silver. When I started working in the craft area first from a fine art background, it was mainly in Ireland, and there's a big tradition of silver in Ireland and metal. And in the big events I was doing for them internationally, I tried to include as much silver as I could. And the first time I went to an international show was to SOFA, Chicago, which is a very big international craft fair. And I showed 5 silversmiths. And the very first day, a big collector came in and said, no one's going to buy this because we don't have staff any longer. So it reinforced that again, that sort of tradition of people thinking of it as somehow a burden rather than something to be included. So this was all going around in my head the whole time, like what way do I approach it, what way do other people approach it? During that first trip to Chicago at that time, I went to the Art Institute, and in one of the back rooms on the way to one of the American furniture rooms, I think, I came across this glass case, which had these 2 huge Georgian candelabra in it. But they had completely oxidized. They were completely black, but a kind of an oily black, because it wasn't a purposeful oxidation. It was a kind of an oxidation of time. And they were very arresting, because instead of that usual shiny, bright, sparkling thing, there was this object that was sinister and black and different. And unusually, there was no explanation as to why. There was no note saying these haven't been cleaned because they were found somewhere and we don't want to remove it, or whatever. It was just like an accidental abandonment of something that had somehow been left there and forgotten about. But again, that image stuck in my mind always about that transformation of an object through it being a different color than I expected, and through it having a different surface than I had been used to seeing. So this is all a long meander into kind of where this exhibition came about. My conversation with David and with Harriet here about contemporary silverware and the fair and everything was about that, was about me saying those things about, I think a lot of people don't see they can have these things in their lives because they see them as somewhat of a burden. It's something they see somebody else had in their lives and was never used. And I was trying to think, is there other ways? And I have been drawn through watching people's work over the last while to seeing how many people have started oxidizing work more. So that was my starting point. So then he came back and said, oh, will I curate a show? And I said, okay. So I started going through the entire list of everybody in Goldsmiths, looking at websites, figuring out who I could use, who worked in that genre. I didn't want to go, there wasn't the time to approach people and say, can you make something for this show? And can you make it in black? So I had to look at people who already were working with oxidation. What unfolded then was a really amazing journey because actually I discovered a whole wealth of other ways of blackening silver that I had never thought of. I found out about black gilding. I found out about patinations. I found out about different processes. And as I've often said to people, I think sometimes my role as a kind of curator in this instance is to be that kind of wide-eyed amateur who doesn't really know anything and is stumbling through this world, is engaging with the makers who know so much and going on a journey of discovery. So it's about that opening up of a world that isn't my world, but I am being engaged with it and being dragged into it and being entertained by it, being amused by it, being told fascinating stories. And I think that's what I love about the whole idea of making, is that whereas I'm always looking for things to be contemporary, everything contemporary has an echo or a history. Everything refers back. So in a way, the whole of that little box downstairs, which is the exhibition, is full of souvenirs of that journey and that travel. It's a combination of existing work, because I went to people, and we could go on to the first slide, like Angela Cork, who, whoops, hang on a second, it'll take me there, whose work I've always admired and whose black work I've always admired, and I love her simplicity and I love her pared downness. And again, about that dialogue of not knowing or not being afraid to ask questions, which as a curator I can't stand there pretending I know things, I have to ask. I had fictionalized this blown vase to be a technique. And I had thought she had generated some way of actually putting air into something that would create the thing. And she was just laughing at me. She said, no, it's just a term about it looks like it's been blown, but all it is hammered into two forms and then joined. But I had created this other story and this other myth, which actually didn't exist. But what I loved about this, and it was back to that use thing, is that this to me be the most beautiful vase to have a bright yellow tulip in. It would be gorgeous with a white rose. It's such a shame not to be able to use this on a daily basis to enrich her life. And I think by it being oxidized and not needing care, it may lead people to looking at it and using it. I talked about that idea of function and use and not use. And this is something that comes across. At the moment, when I was doing this, I was also curating a huge show of ceramics for the Irish Crafts Council. And the whole show is called Vase, Function Reviewed. And I was looking at how function is misused or used or how it's engaged with by artists. So at the same time I was looking at this body of work, I was constantly thinking of those ideas of use. And I'm doing this backwards. Oops. And the second piece that I want to show in relation to that is Lady Hock's work, which I've always loved. And she did this beautiful pair of pouring vessels for me. And she imagines these as wine vessels that would sit at a table. And when I was talking to Corinne Julius for the review she did in the Evening Times the other day, I said, they look to me like two little fat ducks that kind of waddle across the table. And I love that idea of them being somehow mysterious and dark, functional, engaging in terms of being held in the hand, how you engage them and hold them, how they'll feel, how you will be pouring them. In terms of having wine in them, how as you drink more wine and get slightly more inebriated, the humour of them will probably play a more part. About the dialogue between the two of them if you had them on a table, and the dialogue between you and somebody else. And again, that idea of a ritual and a story unfolding. I love the way, and I think this one is not the image of the ones that are below. The ones below are actually have scratched surface. I love the idea that they're almost pre-scratched, that they, again, lose that preciousness. When I was doing the show, I thought of there's a very elderly American couple who have a house in Ireland who I've known for over 30 years. And as long as I've known them, and Joan is now becoming 90 next week, they have always used this tiny little Georgian milk jug, which is on the table every day. It lives in the fridge. I think it probably hasn't been polished for 40 years. But it is something that every day they use. Every day it's part of their life, and every day it's there. It's battered, it's slightly damaged, but it's been lived with. So it was back to that, and I love seeing that contemporary makers like these first two are making things about that use. But I think we as an audience often put a preciousness on them that isn't needed, isn't warranted. It came up with a show in Ireland where people said, because I got florists in to put flowers in some of the pieces as part of the show, and people said, but you can't put flowers in, it's £16,000. And I was saying, yeah, but we spend 80,000, 100,000 on a car, and we drive it in the streets. You know, why can't we use these things? What devalues them? You buy jewellery and wear it, and nobody thinks the stone might fall out, or one thinks if it does, it's part of the function. So again, I wanted to think of all of those things about how we use it. One of the other things I talked about with Goldsmiths was about metals other than silver or gold and their place within the fair. That'll come up in some of the images later on. Karina Gill is a young maker in that she's not young in years, but she's young at the activity. One of the things a lot of the makers talk about when they're discussing is the affordability, the cost. You know, how they're having to make smaller objects because the price of silver is getting higher and higher. How their cost of materials is hampering their creativity. That's why I'm talking about metal smithing rather than silver smithing, because I think more and more the building we're in maybe needs to embrace that, about the fact that can we continue to only work in certain metals, because is it going to hamper the making? A lot of contemporary makers I work with who are silver people are metalsmiths and who used to make silver aren't any longer, because it is hampering their creativity. So again, that's an interesting thing about the whole series. So these are another young maker, Emma Jane Rule. I love the organicness of this and the previous piece. I love the etching the surface. I love the patination, bringing that out. I think it's a really interesting way of working. The sculptural quality of this. But I would love to see some of these pieces this size. So again, is that possible to happen within the confines of having silver all the time? Or is it something we should look at in terms of encouraging more exploration of metal? Back to this very simple piece, quite a traditional piece. And that's what was nice about my journey, is my understanding and I suppose my awareness is probably of a younger generation of maker who are more experimental, with a generation that are more art college trained, where they're trained in a mainly maybe more of an art tradition rather than a craft tradition, and are looser maybe in how they produce things. It was really lovely going through this journey and meeting makers of a previous generation maybe, who had a different approach and a different set of skills and a different set of attitudes. It was lovely coming across the beauty of a simple object like this, which actually isn't trying to do anything but be elegant and beautiful and nicely made and joyful. and has just a pleasantness which is sort of so enriching. And it's a tiny little piece, you know. It's only that size, and I was kind of in shock almost when I saw it, because I'd seen all these images of it and loved it, but somehow had grown it into this big thing, which it wasn't. But again, its beauty is sort of in that sort of scale and sense of correctness about it. There's something very satisfyingly whole and complete. But it sort of worries me that these things that are very beautiful will end up locked away somewhere rather than embraced and used. So that's part of what I wanted to think about. This, again, were these great fruit bowls by Abigail Brown. My only criticism of the whole exhibition layout below, which was done for me by this great design team, was that the way these are done, they don't look black at all, because you're just seeing the bottom of them rather than the inside of them. But I think, again, these are just beautifully resolved pieces of work. They're architectural, but they're organic. They've got a beautiful flow. But I hope someday somebody will buy them and put fruit in them. Because, again, I think they're going to be reanimated by that. They're going to be re-engaged with. It's the way they would move when you start taking things out of them. The way they would respond to you using them is really important. And I kind of worry about the fact that kind of some materials are being pushed into that sort of, it's being bought for something other than its enjoyment. It's being bought in a way as an investment, or it's being sold in that way rather than being something. I started thinking about alchemy the other day, about base metals to gold, and I was thinking, actually, metalsmiths do that the whole time. They actually take a metal, which might be a very cheap metal, and by their craftsmanship and their engagement and their love and their knowledge, they turn it into something of more value. But it's not about monetary value. It is in that you can actually pay a lot of money for a very cheap material that an artist has made into something. But it's also about that enrichment that comes with that manipulation, that time spent. These I love because they were humorous. You can't see them in a static position. You need to go to a stand because they're magnetized. So you hit them and they wobble. And these are pill boxes, remedy pods, so they're for pills. They're black gilding. I had a lovely talk with Alan Cracks before I came in. I was asking him could he explain how black gilding is done? He said, oh, go and ask my gilder, because I don't know. And I suddenly realized that, again, is that collaborativeness thing in the craft world. Everybody doesn't know everything, but you know who knows what you don't know and who can do it really well. But these reminded me, again, of entertainingly doing something with something, and that's what a maker does. That why does a pill box have to be kind of boring and static? Why does it not be something we can engage in a different way? And then I brought a silver object that I use twice a day, every day, which is my pill box, which is a Japanese silversmith did it. But when he gave it to me, he said, on no condition could I ever polish it. Because he said that your use every day, the way you rub your hand across it, will affect this color, and it will tarnish, and it will change. And that change is a living part of this object. And back to that idea of rituals, every day, twice a day, I have to open this and take pills, and it's divided into two surfaces. So I've got a little nighttime bit and a daytime bit. And every day I engage with this, and every day it takes the boring thing of taking pills a little bit more interesting, a little bit more enjoyable. It creates a ritual. And as I get older, it changes color, and it tarnishes, and it gets different, like I am, like we all are. So, that's kind of what I was trying to bring out in this, is those sort of nuances, maybe, those things. The spinning pomodoro is a beautiful object. It's one of the nicest things I think I've seen in a long while in terms of just its beauty somehow. It's blackness. The black gilding is extremely beautiful. But I love the fact that it spins, because the idea for me is, there's an image, there's a metaphor, there's everything, but the actual act of filling this with potpourri and then spinning it to release the scent, that idea of that engagement, that idea of churning it every day, or when you pass by it in a room that you flick it and it spins and out of that comes that scent. And that's, again, a ritualized moment. That's an engaged moment. It's a moment that one would remember. And that's what I think I'm trying to do, in a way, is sort of bridge that gap. One of the disappointments of the show was the layout, was trying to create a layout. The first one was much more open and engaging, but the insurance company intervened and it had to be less open. And then on the final day, there had to be glass put in because the insurance company wouldn't allow it not to be. And I was there saying, I've just come from curating a show in Ireland of ceramics, and there was £250,000 worth of ceramics in the show, none of which were behind glass, none of which were protected, none of which were broken, and none of which the insurance company had a problem with. And again, it's that sort of barrier. If we show everything behind glass, are we encouraged to engage with it? Are we encouraged to own it? Or is it seen as something that actually is not for today? It's back to what I experienced as a child, the silver services that never came out except for polishing. So again, this is denied. Its reality is denied if you don't have it to engage with. The worst that can happen is it'll get scratched or broken, or it won't. But that patination, that patina of years, is going to add something. That memory of the day it fell off the table and somebody screamed and we all have those stories about things. So again, it's trying to curate those things back in to the thing. Jessica Turrell, I was asked to not really deal with jewellery because they felt there was other shows happening, and I was needing to. They wanted people to look more at smithing rather than the jewellery in this exhibition, which kind of, I thought, there's some jewellery I'd love to include. And then they turned around at the very last moment and said, we'd like you to put some jewellery in as well. So luckily I could go back. And it was Jessica Turrell, I think, is amazing jewellery and enamellist. I love the way she draws on the surface. I love the delicacy of it. I love the kind of almost transient nature of the mark making on it. So it was lovely to be able to include that. Hazel Thorne, young maker, isn't black, but includes black in a very interesting way. And again, about patination and about alchemy and about that idea of gilding metal. And the gilding metal, when she processes it to put the blue in, becomes black. It was really nice, that sort of idea. Gilding metal I'd never really heard of. Then suddenly everybody's using gilding metal because it's, again, a way of, it fuses with silver, but it actually is cheaper than silver. So again, it was really nice to sort of come across that. Steel, it was lovely to be able to include this. But it was the problem, I had to have this debate with them at the thing is, can I include non-precious metals? And there's this wonderful ruling where something that isn't silver can be included if there's 5% of silver in it. So then Julius has put these silver bits in for that reason. Like some of the jewelers I discovered are putting silver pins and things on the back of their pieces. So it gets in rather than So again, I said, we have to debate why are people having to kind of adopt a silly rule or follow it to be included. What's lovely about these is I would love to see them the size of furniture. I'd love to see Julia be bigger and bolder, but she could never do that in silver because she could never afford it. There's some beautiful pieces on her space that are newly made, which are mainly gilding metal, which are lovely. They're about that size. They've got wonderful marks of making on them, where the weld marks, marks are there, the dirtiness almost of the process is there. That's led me to do I want to do a show called Dirty Metal, which is sort of more about that making being visible. Again, because I'm not a jeweler, I'm not a metal person, I kind of want to see other things. I love seeing the perfection of something. I love seeing that surface that's so perfect, but I also love seeing the kind of grubbiness. I love seeing how it's made. I love understanding what's happening to things. Rebecca the Quinn. Now, the next slides are images that aren't in the show because eight of the people decided to make brand new work. I mean, it was only had 3 months, and I was expecting to get pieces that existed, but some people said, no, I want to make something new, I want to make something new. Rebecca was telling me she could have these, and then about 2 weeks ago, she rang up and said, I've made something new, can I change it? It was lovely having that excitement of engagement. She's done this beautiful piece, which is very architectural. It's like a stage set with one perfect silver piece in it. It's really nice. It's not shown off to its advantage there because it's like too singular a view, but I'd love to have it on a table, and I'd love to be able to move around it. Again, using a lot of non-precious metals like copper and gilding material. A beautiful engagement. I mean, I love the way she engages with the work. And Mary Ann Simmons also did 2 new pieces for me. I'd seen this piece in the show in the V&A and really loved it. And I said, had she ever thought of doing something in a patinated metal? And she said she was thinking of that. And she had promised me a piece like this. And then again, there was another phone call saying, I've now made something completely different. As a curator, I trust the people I ask to make something. I look at their work. I know their capabilities. I know what they're able to do. And I love the excitement of getting something I never expected. It's such a wonderful thing. I love giving people the space to do something. I trust that anybody I work with is serious enough to not want to give me a piece of crap. And to date, it has never really happened. And I think it's lovely to give those people the rein to do something. I think if you're commissioning something, you need to think of that as well. Not trying to limit people, try to sort of say, I love your work. I want you to do something wonderful for me. And what I love about your work is this. And then let them run off, because then the true reward happens. Tamar De Vries as well, I think she's showing next week, enameling. I've always been fascinated by enameling, about the way it adheres to the surface, the depth, the kind of reflection, the glassiness of it. So it was really nice to include that. I love the way she uses these fragmented images of photographs she's taken. There's a lovely idea of landscape almost within them. Colson Young, youngish maker. I liked this piece a lot. I love the ritualization of it. She had never done anything black before, but said she had been thinking about it. But she ended up doing a midnight blue piece for me, which I quite like as well, because it's still about darkness, but it's about a different darkness. And it's this beautiful enamel piece with a gold interior, which is really nice. And again, it's like, she said, is it okay, it's not black? And I said, no, it's dark, And again, it's about that engaging and allowing somebody to kind of do something. I love this piece, which is a sake set, which is now in the V&A collection. So it's the sake and then these stack up. And I love the way you take each one down and fill it. I was kind of wondering, how would you actually decide who gets the biggest glass and who gets the smallest glass? But then that's because I'm Irish, I think of those things. Catherine Hinton has made a beautiful tiny box for me, which is very precious, which is down there. She's showing next week, I think. Nan Nan Lu, who was a maker, I'd never seen her work before much. I'd seen images of it, but I'd never met her. And I really loved something about equality. So we had a really long conversation on the phone, and she promised me a piece which was going to be black paper, because she often uses paper and silver layered. And then about, again, 2 weeks ago, she rang, panicked, because I'd sent an email saying I needed to clarify all the descriptions for the list. And if I didn't hear back from people, I assumed there was no change. And then 3 weeks later, I got this phone call saying, oh, you found your email now, and I've totally changed, and does it matter, So luckily at the time. But she's done this beautiful piece, which is silver, which has then been gilded with gold, and then it's been gilded with black, and then the black has been rubbed back. And it's like somehow an object that's trapped, it's just been poured. It looks liquid. It looks like it's dropping off. It's one of the most exciting kind of things I've seen in a long while, because it was completely the opposite of what I expected. It was completely the opposite of what she had promised, but it's the most beautiful piece of work. And again, it's back to that sort of confidence in somebody and saying, well, if you think it's better, so what I promised I made you isn't working out, but I think this one is better. And I said, if you think it's better, then I'll trust you that it is. And it's staggeringly beautiful. And in the light below, she was just saying she's so happy with how it looks. Michael Carberry, I forgot to wear it today. I have a ring of Michael Carberry's, which I love, and it's a very big ring, which I wear often. And this is a terrible shot because it's very low res. But he did 2 beautiful bracelets for me, and I love the forgedness of his work. I love the kind of hammeredness. And I think it's about the last slide, Jonathan Boyd, another jeweler who's just out there, who does amazing work. He did a big brooch for me. And again, I love the idea of the narrative on it and the text. That's sort of it. So the 2 things I probably want you to take away with is sort of the question in your mind about the objects in your life, and is there a way of including objects that maybe will enhance what you do, how you live. I think we all, and I'm a victim of it as well, tend to shy away from some things that we have placed into a position where they're not supposed to be used. I've been threatening for ages. I have silver. There's silver in my life, but it actually never gets polished unless we're having suddenly something happening. We kind of feel guilty and we then do it. I'm thinking now of getting the whole thing kind of blackened, because at least then it would have a kind of an elegance rather than a kind of a grubbiness. But then I refer back to those candelabras and I think, well, maybe if I leave them grubby enough for long enough, they will become beautiful. And I suppose that's kind of what I wanted this to be about. It's just a different way of maybe viewing things, a more contemporary way, a less precious way. I see this as the beginning of a journey in exhibitions on metal. I'd like to do some more. I'd like to delve more in. My background is fine art. I kind of stumbled into craft 15 years ago. I've had journeys through different materials. Ceramics has been the biggest one I've worked with. I've worked with metal a bit, but I'd love to work more. This has made me hungry to kind of do more work. And that's, I suppose, what's down there is the souvenirs of the journey. And I think the applied art and craft are the souvenirs of our life. They're the things we kind of surround ourselves with. So I try to think more about that engagement and talk to makers about that, and that's it. Okay, thank you.